Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Average Joes. I'm Joseph St. John. And as many of you know that have been watching this, I got about 30 years in law enforcement. If you're new to this, I've been involved in police work for 30 plus years, teaching, being involved. I've been in charge of about everything, including homicide for a short time in Newport News. But most importantly, just been engulfed in this basically my whole adult life. So we're looking forward to talking about our episode of the Michigan murders today and getting into that. And my partner in crime today, Robert Baker, tell me what you got.
I'm Robert Baker. I'm an attorney in Southwest Michigan. I have been for about 20 some years, 25 total. Practiced about 20, do primarily, or a big chunk of my practice is criminal defense. So but Joe and I both bring a unique aspect to what we're reviewing. We are up to, depending on how you're counting them, the sixth or seventh victims in what was called back then in the day the Michigan murders or the co-ed killings back from 67 to 69.
But we know that there is one that we think happened in Iowa with an Iowa State person.
Yeah.
And then next, in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about a murder that we know was involved with John Collins out of California.
Yeah.
So, yeah, keeping count could be a little bit out of hand. Today's victim is an interesting victim, and I mean that sincerely in the sense that as each one of these murders has increased, they have gotten more intense.
Yes, they have.
And Alice, and how do we pronounce Alice's last name there?
Alice Kalom. She was 21, University of Michigan. It's a little conflicting whether or not she was a grad student or whether she had graduated. They said she had more than enough. Our source material is about 3 or 4 books.
Yeah. And I think one of the things with her, this is one of those interesting one where piecing together her last night has been interesting.
Yeah, it is difficult because she had bought some brand new purple pump shoes, and she got dressed up and she was going to the Depot House, which is on, I think it's Ashley Drive. The building, I believe, is still there. It's the old railroad depot in Ann Arbor. And at the time, it was a place for rock bands to practice. And there was going to be relatively famous local musician was going to be his birthday party. So she was going there. And she was last seen leaving her apartment at about 8:30. And her apartment was at 311 Thomas Street, which interestingly is, less than 7/10 of a mile away from Theta Chi. If you remember from previous episodes, is kind of threaded throughout these different cases. You also have, that's what you're seeing on the screen. If you're watching this, that's the house that she was living on. It's actually still there. It's in between a couple of newer buildings, but it's like a boarding house. And I think she was on the first floor in apartment number 2. And she was into photography. Some interesting things that when she left the house, she didn't take her purse or any identification. There's conflicting information as to whether she was at the Depot House or not. Some people that know her saw her there. Other people that were there said there was a woman who looked like her, that at 3:30 in the morning, somebody had seen what they believed to be her making out with a long-haired hippie dude out in front of the Depot House. She disappears from the Depot House, and we had found, or at least I found today, because I was looking for this coffee house, and one of the source materials that I'm looking at is Catching Serial Killers by Earl James, who was if you remember ad nauseum, we keep saying he is the evidence person who is the task force has yet to be set up, but it will be in 1969 in just a couple of months when the last murder occurs. But so that's what I'm using as my source material. And he has her, and Joe, you wanted me to read this part about John Norman Collins, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, and this is, so Ed James, when John Norman Collins goes on trial, I believe in early 1970, he is tasked with doing several police reports for the prosecutor to prosecute him. So this is what he writes about, and in his book, he uses a pseudonym, unfortunately, but he calls her Carrie B. But after the finger of suspicion pointed toward John Norman Collins in the subsequent murder of Carrie B., I'm sorry, that's the last one, which was Karen Sue Beineman, several items of evidence, physical, direct, and circumstantial, also pointed strongly towards him in this case. Some of the items listed are discussed below. On the night of June the 7th, this is 1969, the last night the victim was seen alive, John Norman Collins was observed crossing State Street and Liberty Street, a short distance from Ann Kay, which is Alice Kalom's apartment in Ann Arbor. This witness knew Collins well from intramural wrestling matches. Also on that day, during the early afternoon, another couple talked to John Norman Collins in Ann Arbor. He was on a motorcycle. It was unknown whether it was his motorcycle or one that he had stolen. The witness said Collins acted much differently than he usually did. He seemed aloof. He had a way out look in his eyes as they were talking to him. He would not look at them, but just kept looking around. But more salient is John Norman Collins' roommate, Arnold D., who was Arnie Davis. Arnold Davis said that during the evening hours on or about June the 7th, Collins picked Ann up and brought her to the apartment house in Ypsilanti where he and Collins lived. Arnold identified the victim from recent photos as a girl Collins had in his room. Arnold said there was a disturbance and Ann Kay ran from the apartment building and Collins chased after her. Sometime later, Collins returned to the apartment and Arnold asked him what the problem was earlier. According to Arnold, Collins told him in substance that she would not have sex with him. The white miniskirt the victim was wearing at the time she was murdered was checked for evidence. A wavy boot print was found on the skirt. After Collins was arrested, a pair of fur-lined boots with a wavy rippled sole was seized. The comparison between the print and the skirt and Collins' boot were similar in all respects and different in none. And as Joe and I talked about before, this woman was wearing a purple shirt, a red and black striped rain jacket, a white bandana with an A pin in her white headband, and purple pumps. And I think that's pretty distinctive. So you would think that those people would know them, right?
That's one of the interesting things because I think she's dressed flamboyant. And that's kind of the impression from everything I've read. Okay.
So
there's nothing wrong with that. She's out and she's at a rock concert. Okay.
Right.
Young woman, nothing wrong with that. But you do have to kind of think, okay, you're starting to read and you're starting to do some research and you're like, she is dressed pretty flamboyant. And yet you still had people trying to say, I saw her, but I didn't see her. There was somebody to look like her. That's one of the problems with all of this situation when you're trying to wrap it up or getting your mind wrapped around it. You would have thought somebody dressed that specific. People would have noticed. There wouldn't have been this debate.
So you have that about Arnie Davis having her at that rooming house at some point in that evening. There's a trucker that sees who he identified as Alice Kalom in a coffee shop in Ann Arbor.
It's a Dunkin' Donuts now, but back then it was what?
Well, I think it's a Starbucks now, but it was a Dunkin' Donuts when the picture that I found was, but it was a Mark's coffee shop, I believe, back then. And it was frequented by a lot of people. But this trucker saw her at 4 a.m. Okay, so that would be maybe in line with the 3:30 when the people saw her in the parking lot of Depot, because it's not very far from any of this stuff that we're talking about.
And if you're new to the show, there's this point where she's supposedly making out with a hippie, whatever that means. And Norman Collins is a lot of things, but no one would have described him as a hippie.
No, not at all. Not at all.
He was a clean cut kind of dude.
Yeah. And interesting, there's another Volkswagen involved in this, and somebody had seen her talking to two guys that were in a Volkswagen. That another one of the last scene. There's conflicting between the three main books that we're using, which is Fournier's Terror in Ypsilanti, the Michigan Murders, and the Catching Serial Killers. A lot of conflicting evidence or conflicting reports. I mean, she was definitely going to go to the depot house.
Right.
Whether she made it there or not, we don't know. Okay, but what we do know is that I think it was 3 teenagers found her at an abandoned farm the very next day, and she had been shot twice in the head with a .22, stabbed repeatedly. Her carotid was cut, and her head was almost cut completely off.
Again, for those that, maybe you're new to this and you got to go back and look at some of the other episodes, the intensity is ratchet up now.
Big time. And this is where, when we started this, we said the Gary Leiterman case is kind of what brought us to this series of murders. Okay. Well, Jane Mixer was killed just a couple of months prior to this in 1969, and she was shot in the head twice with a .22. Okay. The powers that be, and Gary was even convicted, saying that the Jane Mixer murder was totally different than all the rest.
Right.
Well, she was shot in the head twice, and she was strangled. This woman was shot in the head twice, and she was stabbed repeatedly.
Right.
All right.
And it was a .22 in both situations.
It was a .22, and it was also 6 lands and grooves on the ammunition. Okay. And they said that in both cases that the slugs were so deformed that they couldn't be compared appropriately, which I don't know whether that's true or not. And I had, and you might know more about this than me, but I was wondering if the lead can be compared as far as the metallurgy to.
I know they've always went with the grooves, and somebody knows better than me on there, knows better than you. Say something in the comments, but I've always thought about it as the grooves.
I know the lands and grooves, that just shows that the rifling, that the bullet was ejected, and they say that it's a 6, high standard 6 is what they were saying. And this is the other thing that goes back to Jane Mixer is the night supposedly after, at least, and that's in the Catching Serial Killers book, which I told you was not properly edited. And
Right.
I suspect that that's the wrong date, but he had stolen a .22 revolver with 6 lands and grooves, a high standard revolver.
Right.
So you have 2 murders that occurred within months of each other. The victims were shot in the head twice. Okay. Jane Mixer, it appeared like she was shot while she was riding in the car, because she was shot, I believe, in the left temple. Okay. This one, she had a superficial wound. I think it was her thumb.
Okay.
Like she had put her hands up in order to stop when he shoots. They shoot her. All right. So you can take that for what's that worth. And then in the bitter end, I'm hoping we can tie all these together. But the other issue with this was there was a copious amount of semen in her.
Yes.
So she was repeatedly raped by the same guy over a period of time, or there was other perpetrators, which Joe and I have always suspected. I'm leaning closer and closer to it. And where her body was placed was in I think Fournier called it a 12-mile, so did Edward Keyes in the Michigan murder book, a 12-mile kind of triangle of where all of the killings, even Jane Mixer, had occurred. So
Right here.
yeah. So,
And everything, there is a lot of similarities, for as much as people want to say things are different, and all of them are a little different. But I think that for people that were acting like the .22 was so unique, I mean, I'm like, well, here we have the second murder that involves a .22.
yeah. And I had sent you, Joe, a few different news articles. One out of the Psychology magazine, and another one that was written by, I think, a Bronx detective.
Right.
Regarding MO, which is
Right.
Latin for modus operandi, or mode of operation, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and signature, and then I think there was something about posing and something else.
Right.
And we didn't really go into that in any of these. I mean, I had been trying to get my handle on this because that was what I think it was Detective Schroeder had said of why Mixer was so different.
Mm-hmm.
Was that that the MO was so different. And everything that I've read, and Joe's read far more than I have on other serial killers, is that these guys get, and Joe loves that movie with Kevin Costner in it, where Mr. Brooks or whatever the hell.
Yeah, Mr. Brooks. It's a great movie.
And so these killers, serial killers, their MO or the way that they're doing things evolve as they learn, unfortunately, over time. And
I think that, like I said, with the Mr. Brooks, there's a scene, in case you haven't seen that movie, where he basically says, before I was the thumbnail murderer, I was, the thumbnail killer. I was this kind of killer and that kind of killer, just trying to prove his point that he just changes up to throw people off. There's a cat and mouse game, and I kind of want to discuss this because people want to make, and we all do it. I do it too, and there's no insult to it. I mean, I think we all get into being amateur profilers, but here's one of the things I want to really emphasize to people when they listen to this, especially if it's first time. We really don't, there is a point of us where we're trying to rationalize irrational people.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and keep that in mind. But the thing of it is, in a good case with talking about these particular murders, there is a situation where he catches everybody off guard. He's able to get them in a car. He's able to take them from one place, kill them, and then take them to another place. Okay, all of those do have those in common. But you don't know what's motivating them. When you read about other cases, there are people like in the Boston Strangler case, there was just an older woman that he has no reason, but he couldn't kill.
Yeah.
There's another one that he just basically mutilates, okay, and is hard on, and just really adds extra destruction to the person because he felt that she didn't like it. Now, of course, she didn't like it. She was being raped, but we're talking about him making sense of his own actions.
Right.
There's other cases where you hear where they had people in the car and they didn't finish the deed. And other people they brutalize.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think that there is that point where you do have this kind of MO, how did they do it? And then there is a signature at the end. I think with these cases, because we do not have all of the crime scene, okay, I don't know if I'm ready to go there with all the signature stuff.
Yeah.
But to think that everybody that does this homicide is going to follow the pattern every time, I just don't think that's even logical.
Yeah, the signature, at least the way, and I've circled back and I'm reading the Mindhunter, and Joe, I think, is watching it now.
Yes, I am. I'm enjoying it.
Well, the signature is supposedly what the serial killer gets out of the killing.
Right.
It's different than mode of operation. It's
right.
More that he has to have this in order for him to satisfy him. Like BTK was just a sadistic freaking killer, right?
Right. Right.
And wasn't he caught like doing autoerotic strangulation by his wife? He was in a dress and he was hanging himself or something.
I did not hear that, but I would.
Yeah, there is. It's totally true. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So
he was more than a little misunderstood. And by the way, his wife knew a little bit more than me. I don't know anything.
Right.
That's my personal belief on that. Okay.
But the signature in this, and that was why I thought that Jane Mixer was different. But a lot of this woman was really highly intelligent too. I mean,
mm-hmm.
she didn't get into Wesleyan or whatever, Smith or Wesleyan. She was trying to go to these higher end colleges, and she got into the University of Michigan, but they don't let slouches in the University of Michigan. It's a freaking Ivy League school. Right?
Yeah. I mean, that says a lot. Here's my problem that I think sometimes when we're dealing with it. Mixer, going back to her, he may, or the killer, let's pretend that they're all the same for a second. Let's just make that and kind of take Gary out of it for a second.
Yeah.
Her way of dealing with him may have made him feel totally different. Another person could have came across totally different and made him feel another way, more violent, more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't know if you don't want to speculate with everything that you don't know, but then again, you don't want to speculate and go, well, they're all, he's going to do the same thing every time. That's not rational. Yeah. And again, anybody that's listened to any of these episodes before knows that I also believe in interrupters.
meaning something that interrupted his train of thought. Whether it was a person intervening, that person turning him off, that person having some sympathy or empathy, you know, we don't know. But there are interrupters. That's why I think you have some differences. One of the things, too, is, you know, it seems that she, you know, we go on Alice here, is she was raped multiple times. Or that was the way it was always applied to in everything I've read.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? You know, was there other people involved? Anybody that's listening to these know that we believe there possibly could have been some of these. I'm not going to go as far as even say every one of these was done by the same person. And I'm not going to go as far as saying that every one of these was done by one person. Some of these may have had other people. Because here again, we've got Collins brought her back to the apartment. There's all this stuff going on and all of these things. Mm-hmm. And we're not putting anybody down. We have all the background here that people may not have had or happened to deal with. But there does seem to be, like in most of these, there seems to be a lot of questions I wish that had been asked and then answered.
Yeah, the Hendricks, I believe, was the ME who did the autopsy on Alice. And he was mad that it never got prosecuted because he thought that there was enough to convict Collins, because there was a blood, you know, the rudimentary blood tests, I guess they were doing typing and whatever. And it was like a 1 in 200 chance that you know.
I think at the end of the day, when we wrap this up, okay, weeks from now, when we wrap this up, I think there's going to be some consistencies. And I think you're seeing this with the Atlas case very, very important. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're wishing that they went ahead, maybe not had every case tried, kept some in the back in case something happened. Mm-hmm. I wish some of these cases had been tried. I wish there had been a more full-fledged taking it to court. Mm-hmm. Okay. I think they left a lot of open ends because they didn't. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I also think that I wish that they had spent a little bit more time seeing if there hadn't been other people involved.
This is the third one, I think, third or fourth one where it appears like there was more than one perpetrator.
You got the Volkswagen back in. You just mentioned you have a large amount of semen.
Yeah.
You're just like, I just wish they would have took that next step.
She was seen with two guys at that coffee donut shop.
Yeah. And, once again, you're just tying it in. I do like the fact, and I hate to use the word like, but I do like the fact that there is this confusion in a way, because that's why you need to investigate it. She is dressed, we mentioned before, not anything bad, but she's dressed incredibly flamboyant.
Yeah.
And if you read any of the source material, that comes out.
So was the 13-year-old, if you remember. She had like an orange mohair sweater, and she had just done a bouffant hairdo, right?
Yeah.
So.
But she's at a concert, and you can't get people to guarantee whether she was there or not. And she's seen with hippies, and she's, on and on and on. So for people to think that putting everything together is easy, it's not. But I would have liked to have seen, because of that confusion, there been a little bit more work done to it. Mm-hmm. Just being upfront with it. And that's one of the things I think that when we sit here and we discuss this, that's the part a lot of times that I'm like, wow, man, I just wish they had done it. And it's not just about Gary, it's about all of it. Because what if there were other people involved?
Well, remember too, okay, so John Norman Collins at the time was living at Emmett Street. I think it was 618 or whatever, 615, whatever the hell it was, that rooming house. He was living with Arnie Davis. He was also living with Andrew and Manuel. Manuel was going to hideous with him and go to California.
Right.
With a stolen freaking camper.
Which is going to be the murder after this one.
Yeah. And he is totally left out of any conversation, it seems like, with law enforcement.
Yeah. There isn't quite the follow-up I would have liked to have seen. Maybe one day we'll figure out, somebody will come and say, hey, there was nothing, but it's not what I'm seeing. Yeah. Not at least with our source material.
Well, and then you have the first murder. Was it the second murder that for sure there was at least 3 people?
Oh, there's 3 people in the car with the
Oh,
second.
that's right. The red car, and you got 3
There's
people.
3 people. And we heard 2. And then the first murder, they heard 2 voices.
Right.
When they,
So then this
right
one, you've
before
got
they
a
done
copious amount of semen, unless this guy's a super secretor or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, and that was just, you just look at the follow.
And then that begs the question. We know that in 01, 02, whatever it was, Detective Schroeder and his partner pulled all of these cases out and ran DNA on everything they could run it on. Okay, well, there's nothing anywhere that we've seen or could find, except for that one interview with Eric Schroeder where he may say Alice Kalom. I didn't get to look at that again, and I will before our postscript to see whether or not he mentions that. He does for sure that it was that his DNA was on Kalom, right? I mean, on the base
on basic, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not seeing that as being put in there with anywhere where it's confirmed. It's just him saying some stuff, and I'd like to see something in a more investigative manner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back here now to the Alice situation. There's the part that she's into photography. There's the part where there's a lot of people that know of her. She's out there. She's kind of been known, and she's, what is, let me get here for the screen share so everybody can see, so I can quote this right. Okay. Let me get it there so we can get it right. Again, the picture of everybody. She was serious, likable. Okay. And, we'll have a link for everybody to read the story, but it's just one of those things where everybody is, she's known, she's out there, and we have a picture. Tell a little bit more about that. She's, where she's taken and where she's murdered, and then where she ends up.
Yeah, that is so. Where she was taken from is up in the air. Okay. We have the thing that I just read out of the Catching Serial Killers book, that she was running away from John Norman Collins' house. All right. Or she could have been leaving at 4:00 in the morning from that donut shop. Or she could have been leaving from the depot house over on Ashley Street. Where she left from, we don't know, but she was taking to, I think it was called Washtenaw Gravel and Sand or something like that. And they didn't know this at the time, but they eventually found some buttons and some shoes and a bunch of blood. And then she was dumped at an abandoned farm, and she was found by 3 or 4, I think it was 3 or 4 youths or teens that were cutting lilacs for a local floral place, right? So that was where her body was found, and it was almost in the road, evidently. So they found that. And that was at about 3:00, I believe, on June the 9th. And remember, she was last seen, depending on how you see it, either on June the 8th or June the 9th in the early wee morning hours of it. So she was at most in the, depending on when you think about it, 12 hours unaccounted for, other than where her body was found. But her body was soaked. It had rained heavily that night. So she was found at this, and it was on, I believe it was off Territorial Road. And we have the picture, which we'll throw up again eventually.
Yeah, the picture will be up if it hasn't been up already.
Yeah. Of where exactly she was. And then that sand and gravel place was where they believed that she was actually killed. So that's the second time, I believe, that, so Basom, they knew where she was killed and where she was dropped. This one, they knew where she was killed and where she was dropped. The previous ones, I'm not sure they knew where they were killed.
I'm not sure they know where all of them were, but we do know that we're comfortable saying that within these murders that we have, if there is a MO, is finding them somewhere that they weren't murdered at. That they're taken from one location to another location, they're murdered, then they're dropped off at a third location. So we kind of know that. The signature, I know what they're doing. There's there is a certain sexual brutality to it all. And we know that with most of them. There's also a certain displaying of them. And without all the crime scene photos, I don't want to get into that because we're speculating way too much. But so even with Mixer, who was the least brutalized, okay,
Right.
there was still some signature of her being displayed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And to sit there and go, he didn't do that to her, so that's different. No, I don't know. It goes back to my interrupter thing, but because there's still that display. There's still a certain shock value that when you found her, even if you had to move a little bit of clothes or something, there was going to be a shock value.
There was, I don't know whether you saw this, but there was there was a bunch of pinpricks in her thighs. I didn't understand where that could have come from.
No, there's everything that we do. There is some things that, you open up one can of worms and there's just something else. Okay. A lot of people may have forgotten this, but there was detergent on her, if I'm not mistaken. Was there?
Mixer had detergent.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Mixer had detergent on her, and we're going to find out here in a couple of weeks that he did have access to a room that had detergent in it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay.
No.
So, when you go to MOs, it can be a little bit complicated because, again, talking about Mixer, she had detergent on her. Mm-hmm. In a few weeks, if you're listening to this, we're going to have another one that had detergent. Mm-hmm. Okay. We have other ones where he takes them to abandoned houses. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that they have to be the exact same place. It's very obvious he's going to get you one place, kill you somewhere else, and drop you off at a third place.
Yeah.
So each one of these murders, whether it's done by one person, three people, they're all different. One of the reasons you can put all these together is because there is that triangle. Get them at one location, kill them at another, drop them off at a third.
Yeah.
So, there is that part of it.
And, whether he or they are having sex with her post-mortem, I'm not sure they've determined that, right?
I wouldn't read anything in my time doing it that I would have said yay or nay on that.
Right.
I wouldn't say he did, and I wouldn't say they did.
Yeah. And that was where I had wished Fournier would have done more in his book, because it's my understanding that they did some groupie interviews of John Norman Collins and previous girlfriends and stuff.
Yeah, I think one thing here, and this is a little tease for the listeners for no better terminology for it. We have several more weeks for this one. I mean, we got a lot more to cover, okay? But then after this one wraps up, we'll be doing a bunch of other things, and we'll come back and visit this. I don't know if even when we started this all those months ago, actually understood just how deep we were going to go.
No.
And I mean that for the listener. I mean, you start this off, you talk about it. We talked about this case for over a year.
Sure.
I mean, so, it isn't like we weren't planned, but actually the more you talk about it, you start getting into, wow, why wasn't anybody do this? Why wasn't that? Why was it so easily to dismiss the people around him? Hmm. And let me give you a little bit. We talk about signatures and talking about MOs. Here's one of the things in my little study. By no means am I an expert, but my little study of some of the stuff with the serial killers that I find intriguing that many of them have in common. Number one, there is a certain amount that they are charming because they are able to talk their way into situations. They are able to get people to, at least at the beginning, to be compliant. Okay, not through threat or intimidation, but to just be compliant. Okay. One of the weird things in reading a lot of different stuff on serial killers, and I didn't realize this until we talked, and we'll revisit it at another time when we both know a little bit more. Do you know there seems to be some ability that they're burglars?
Yeah.
Collins is a burglar. Let's say he's the one that did all of these, right? He's a burglar.
Okay. He did burglarize for his game, but he is a burglar. Okay. The Boston Stringer, he burglarized, actually went into women's houses just for the thrill of it. Some of these other guys that we've talked about, they burglarized places. They knew how to violate people's privacy. Okay. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, and I think this goes into it too, is that they have an ability to be normal during a very abnormal time. Meaning there's times where they are seen, like in this case with Alice, there's like, I saw him and he was wild-eyed, and I understand that. It happened, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But many times these guys are being seen during the moment, and they are able to come across as calm, cool, and collected.
Yeah.
So there does seem to be that, they can be charming. They do have a tendency to be burglars. They can get into your house. They do not mind violating your personal space. Anybody that has ever been burglarized, even if you weren't home, you feel violated. Mm. Okay. And last but not least, they are being seen during this time frame. And they have the ability to just walk by you and you not even notice if they can stay extremely calm. And that's one of those things, where we have to start looking at it, where I wish people had done more digging, because I think they can do those three things. We know Collins is a burglar. We know Collins is a thief. Yeah. We know Collins done a bunch of things. Okay. But if just because you do that does not make you a murderer, let me explain that. But it does seem like some of these guys who do serial murders have these abilities.
They do.
And, it's something to think about. It's something that when we're talking that may, that's why I wish we looked more into some other people. Okay. Because I do think they were giving out clues about who they were and how they were acting. Mm-hmm. I think John Norman Collins, if you had done more and pushed more and you had been more aggressive about him and his friends, you might find that they were a lot of places that you had no idea they were, that would have probably put them in close proximity of when all of these happened. Okay. And that includes maybe some of his friends. That's why I would have liked to have seen that, because they're not functioning, and I want to use this correctly, they're not functioning in a vacuum, meaning they're not showing up like some sort of voodoo out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. They are manipulating this entire scene the entire time. Mm-hmm. And I just think that, we're pretty sure that Collins had stolen that 22.
We know he stole a 22 on the 21st or 20th or 19th.
And how did he steal it? And he broke into somebody's house, right?
He broke into somebody's house and stole it. Yeah. Yep. Over there by the cemetery, by the way. Over there right by that cemetery where they left Jane.
I can't put enough words that I think that these are the type of things I wish people had looked at. Mm-hmm. That there just seems to be this kind of correlation that people that are going to be homicidal have these tendencies.
She had, Miss Kalom had a peeper incident recent before that she got killed, and I don't know whether you had caught that, but
that part I did not know. Explain.
It scared her. It was at her apartment. Remember, it was main floor.
Right.
And it's right over there by the student union. It's about 0.7 of a mile away from the student union. And she looked up and she saw some dude look in her window, and she waited a little while and then went over, and she stayed across the street at a friend's house for a couple of nights. But as Joe could tell you, at least in what my research has been, is window peepers and burglars tend to ramp it up sometimes.
They do. Peepers used to be 100 years ago. People thought it was just some prank, and it's not. We pretty much know if somebody will peep into your window, they will physically assault you.
Right.
Okay. It's just escalating behavior. I also think that that's what I think happens with the burglars. They just, once they start violating people's privacy, just up it up.
Well, they're going to eventually, because usually they break in when nobody's home, but then
Somebody's
sometimes
going to be home.
somebody is eventually going to be home.
Yeah, and the burglary. Now understand, from law enforcement, we do take burglary serious. We see that as a serious crime. But I'm just wondering, we got all these little burglars running around, and they're just violating people's space, and then we're treating that like that's one thing, and then these sexual assaults and eventually murders are totally different.
And I can tell you,
Which we haven't done that.
Michigan's laws have degrees of, they call it home invasion here, but it's burglary of another sort. But a first degree home invasion, I think it's a 20 or 25 year felony.
Yeah.
And if it's an occupied dwelling, because they know, it's known that if you go into an occupied dwelling with the intent, it's felonious intent, then if there's a firearm involved in Michigan, you get a whippy skippy 2-year mandatory minimum before you ever start your real bit.
Right.
And I had a case where a guy just moved a gun. He didn't even steal it. He just moved it. He was going to steal it. He had put it in a pillowcase and stuffed it under a bed. And that got him 2 years.
Yeah. It needs to be taken serious. Right. I'm just wondering, at that point, did they, at that moment, did they go, these guys are running a burglary ring? Might want to think that there could be the potential to be violent. Because in today's world, we would see a burglary, even if the person wasn't there, as still a violent act.
Right.
Because it had the potential to be violent. So those are some interesting aspects.
Yeah, I think we've talked through most of what I wanted to go through. There was only one more thing, and it came up in Gary Leiterman's case, and I don't know enough about it to talk uber intelligently about it. But when you mix DNA, or at least back in when Gary Leiterman was on trial, it was very difficult to separate it, because you have these helical ladders with the different rungs on it that have values. And when you mix 2 or 3 different people's DNA, it becomes difficult to be able to say who specifically it is. And that came out in Gary Leiterman's case. Okay, well, supposedly they came up with this new test, YSTR or something like that, that supposedly can separate it. And then we had heard recently about the Sanger sequencing, which I have to figure out what the hell that really is. But so you have 3 people's DNA, say it's 2 or 3 copious amounts of semen. How did they, if they did that DNA test of whether or not they could determine whether it was 3 specific dudes? I don't know.
Yeah, I wish there had been more done on that. I wish they had taken this case to court.
I suspect that they did. In 01 or 02, when they ran everybody's DNA, if there was copious amounts of semen, I suspect that DNA was run on that.
I'm hoping because we haven't seen anything confirm or deny that.
True that.
Now we got that. You got the Don thing, and I told him, and he broke down. But that's not exactly what I think the police usually do. I can't sit here 45 years later and dog the police, because we're looking at 50, 40. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think we've been careful, but I think we've been very kind, and I think we haven't dogged the police. But there's also that point in me where I wish we had just had maybe a little bit more technology, or just a little more following.
Well, you had said on the Boston Strangler, I don't understand the thought process, and maybe it's just money driven, that they don't want to try these cases because of the cost.
I don't know. I just think I still think I don't put money before, justice.
So he wasn't ever convicted of any of the murders.
Not the Boston Strangler. No.
Yeah.
That's a messed up case. And we'll talk about it one other day, but that's a messed up case.
And out of the, we're going to talk about probably 8 before it's all over with.
Yeah.
Only 2 have been tried. John Norman Collins in 1969, Gary Earl Leiterman.
Yeah. But none of the other ones will. And we'll get more into Gary's case on there. So everybody, we appreciate you listening this week. If you will, hit like and subscribe and keep coming back. We appreciate everything you do. Make your comments. Let us know what you think. Anything else you got to add, my friend?
I think we've covered everything that I was going to cover. We'll hit what we missed on the postscript.
You got it. Everybody, until then, y'all have a good one, and
see ya.